So my question actually is also a little bit outside the field of energy itself, but still very much connected in relation to transports and cars. There's certainly been a lot of progress with electrically powered cars, which is certainly a big improvement on fossil fuel modes of transport. But I was reading recently there was a Facebook post by Sustainable Australia, which was pointing out to even if we change to electric vehicles, there's still going to be some pollution from tyres, from brakes, and all sorts of things like that. Plus, also there will still be needing the other roads, which just the huge amount of land use that's taken up by roads, whether it's by polluting fossil fuel powered cars or whether it's by electrically powered cars. So that's going to be my question about how you see the future of transport, and whether it's what sort of how we whether we should sort of move away to more mass transport altogether, or would electric vehicles at least be some help towards curbing pollution levels?
Well, I'll take two of them: meat, green capitalism, and future of transport. Let's give all three of them a go. But let's start with the idea that I've been an activist for since I was 17, or which was a while ago now. And for me, how we create change in the world is about creating system change and not about personal change. Yes, I buy green power, and yes, I catch a bus to work and things like that, but the real impact that I think I can make in the world is by the work that I do and creating systemic change. So when I look... So I think that if we're going to be transforming different systems, our agricultural system, our energy system, our transport system, to tackle climate change, which is effectively one of the biggest imperatives that we have on Earth, we've got to do it from a systemic way of not every single individual doing things differently, though that plays a small role. It's about, in old socialist terms, completely transforming the means of production. And so when we talk about community energy, we're talking about how do we transform the energy system so it is owned by different people, so it does different things, while also providing the same essential service that we need to live and work every day. And so that's what I choose to do in my work. I think I enjoy doing it. I think I'm good at it, and I think we need more people who do that type of thing in their daily lives. I think we need people who are looking at the agricultural system and looking at similar ways to transform the way it works. Unfortunately, I can't do both. So hopefully that addresses the sort of first two. The second, the one around the future of transport, I think just like there is an open question about whether we go to more just large-scale renewables that are owned by green capitalists, or go towards a more democratically owned green renewable energy system, there is also an open question about how the future of transport looks. Is it still highly personalised with a whole bunch of impacts of having individualised car ownership and things like that? Or is it a much more mass transit but still more electrified energy system? And I think that that's an open question, and it requires activists, it requires campaigners, it requires intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs and people working to transform that system from the inside and from the out. It's not going to... There is certainly a trajectory towards individualised private electric car use. If we are going to steer us into a different trajectory, it needs people working on it, because that's how the way change is made.
Yeah, I'll just, I guess, probably underline what Nicky just said. There's no point having great success in achieving the energy and transport transition that will solve the climate emergency if we haven't solved the underlying structures that got us into this problem in the first place. We're in the situation we are because of that, and we don't know what the next critical challenge will be, but if we don't fix that problem, there will be another critical challenge. Transport, at face value, sounds like it's like a non-energy issue, but it absolutely is the one area, or one of the key areas, where it is so integrally an energy issue. I guess buildings and transport are the big energy spaces, and so it's certainly something that Pingala would be interested in looking at. It's certainly interesting times. I've grown up thinking that the solution to our problems is public transport, but increasingly it's becoming apparent that the whole dynamic and the whole circumstances around what technology is able to deliver is maybe challenging whether or not that is even necessary. So, for example, some people are saying that if we have effective systems that allow sharing of cars more in the most efficient way, we could reduce the fleet of cars by as much as 30%. And that would go a long way towards solving these peripheral pollution problems, such as pollution from tyres and so forth. The key thing is that communities need to be in control, because it's the consumers and the communities that are impacted by these systems that need to be having a say, and that's not the system we currently have.
Hello, my name is Anne O'Leary, and I have just recently put on Tesla solar. I can't tell you much about it because it's only I haven't got the first bill yet. So it was a major decision in for me, because it's quite expensive, but I've got bad circulation, and I thought I would invest the money, and then I could have as much heat as I wanted in the house. But as Jen, isn't it Jen? What's your name? Nicky, I was asking Nicky, what about apartments? How, big apartments, they'd all probably have to vote to get solar on the roof for them all, right? Because you can see solar around sometimes in a lot of places now in the Bondi Junction.
So Tom and I are working on this right now in our day jobs. We did a project finished a year ago, called Renewables for All. It basically there's somewhere between 30 and 40% of Australians who can't put solar on their roof. They're low-income households, they rent, they live in apartments, or they've simply got shaded roofs, or live in a heritage-listed building. So what the hell are we going to do? Because it's not fair that these households can't have the access to the benefits of solar, and in some cases energy efficiency as well. So we looked at about 5 or 6 different ways of doing this that are working in different parts of the world. I have to say, love him or hate him, Obama did make solar energy access one of his principal energy goals. So he set a 1.1 gigawatt low-income solar target, which is better than anywhere else in the world. So we've been looking at a particular model that's come out of the US that's called a solar garden, and I'm going to hand over to Tom to talk to you about what that is.
So solar garden is a marketing term, and one need to describe what it actually means. A solar garden as a term kind of derives its name from a community garden. So if you can think about this, if you don't have a backyard, you can subscribe to an allotment, and you can share a bit of space with other people, and you can have your own little bit of garden. So this solar garden term comes from that. So here's how it works. We install a big solar array somewhere close to a population centre. It might be on a roof, it might be on the ground, it doesn't matter. But what we do is we allow individual households to own a share of the solar panels. They might own 4 solar panels each, they might own 10 solar panels each. And then the benefit of owning that solar, and this is the critical piece, the benefit of owning that solar is expressed as a credit on their electricity bill. Now, you've got, as you say, Tesla Solar.
Yeah.
The benefit you receive of having solar on your roof is a credit on your energy bill.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an off-site version of rooftop solar. So apartment dwellers, people with shaded roofs, people with heritage issues, they can all participate and own solar, and everybody can have solar, not just the people that are fortunate enough to own a house with a sunny roof that they own. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
The thing to say about it is it works overseas. We're trying to figure out how to make it work with the current sets of regulations and costs in the market right now. So watch this space.
The question I have to the speakers is that the technology that's often the criticisms of the technology of solar and wind is usually that it's not shining all the time and the wind is not blowing. But there's the vanadium redox flow cell battery that I never heard any of you comment on it, by Professor Maria Skylas-Kazak of the University of New South Wales, which they say is the leader in world technology in this sphere. And the electrolyte is a fluid, and it can be transferred into and built up so that you would have no trouble with the sun not shining all the time, because it would be accumulating in this fluid type of electrolyte. And this could be the answer to complete solar and wind generation. I'd like to hear your comments on it, please.
We certainly didn't mention that technology, and it'd probably be hard to count the number of other technologies that we didn't mention. We have a very complex problem to solve if we're going to respond to the challenge of climate change, and we're going to decarbonise our energy supplies. And complex problems have complex solutions, and complex solutions are not comprised of a single technology, but a range of different technologies. The wonderful thing about the technology that you talk about is that it's currently one of the leading developers of that technology is an Australian company. And who thinks it's a great idea that we should be supporting Australian clean technology companies that are solving the climate change and energy problems that we have? Yeah. But there are a range of other Australian companies that have other products, and we should all be thinking about a complex set of solutions to solve the complex challenge that we have.
Yeah, I'd say two more things on that. One of them is, so there's now been about 6 to 8 different studies done showing how Australia can get to 100% renewables technically, and the economics of that. I was involved in one at UTS. And one of the things that you see is that you probably only need about 20 to 30% what we call firm supply, so where you've got, or on demand, so storage like vanadium flow batteries or any type of flow battery, other types of batteries, pumped hydro, sustainable bioenergy, concentrating solar with thermal with storage. So there are about 5 or 6 really good technologies that can provide that firm supply, but you actually need a lot less than people think. So it's only about 20 or 30% once you get to about 100% renewables, or when you're getting up above 50% renewables, which is actually where South Australia is. But I really love vanadium flow batteries, and I really love Redflow, the company that Tom was talking about behind it. They get that they're part of a clean energy ecosystem of different technologies and different business models. And one of the things that really excites me around flow batteries is the idea to make them, currently they're really big, you use them on a commercial scale, but someone was telling me about the idea that you could actually make them much more modular, and then you basically inject the fluid into a car, into a battery cell in a car, rather than having to charge a battery or replace a battery in a car or a bus or any kind of electric vehicle. But you can use a sort of a flow medium, so it's a bit similar to petrol, which maybe can mean that our existing infrastructure can be retrofitted. So that's a way down the future, but it's, I'm an engineer by background, as well as an activist, and so new technology ideas really excite me because, there's a huge amount of potential. But no doubt we need technologies like that.
Hi, my name's Jim, and I'd like to thank the panel. I think that the work that you're doing is exceptionally important. but we've got to look at it from the macro level and the micro level, perhaps. And to me, we've just seen in the media the last couple of days this charade that's going on, that went on with the meeting between Turnbull and the leaders of the various major energy companies. And the fundamental problem to me that we have is political, that we do not have a commitment to 100% renewables within, which could be within 20 years, as you've mentioned. And the problem is that we have large multinational corporations that run our electricity system, and the most fundamental thing that's happened is that state governments have sold off their electricity, the major electricity systems, to private companies. We have no control over our electricity system at the macro level. This is the fundamental problem. So I think it's extremely important that we're building up the community-based electricity, but at the same time we have got to tackle this problem. We have got to renationalise, in my opinion, the electricity grid in this country and put it under community control and put it under some kind of system that will allow us to make decisions on the energy future of the country. So we've got to tackle it from both directions, both from the developing of renewables from the community level, but also we must take on this big political question. We have lost total control of our grid because it's all been privatised and these companies are just scamming us, basically. So I'd like to know what your comment on that.
Yeah, no, I read this the other day. So I think that I want to say 4 things. The first one is, yes, we're getting screwed. Our electricity companies, the gentailers, particularly AGL in South Australia, are screwing us over big time. I'm assuming no one here watches the project. However, I really encourage you to go on Facebook and look at the project's Waleed Ali's talk about why electricity prices are rising that he did last night. It was excellent. The second thing that I want to say is, unfortunately, it's not just private companies that are screwing us over. Our state governments has also, over the last 10 to 15 years, screwed us over and used our electricity assets as a cash cow. So that's not to say that I don't believe that we need public ownership of energy. I do think that there's a really important role, but it needs a lot more oversight than it's had in the past. And unfortunately, this is a big political question. And so that leads me to my third point, which is to say that I went to the US a year and a half ago and I visited a couple of states, one where there was a publicly owned monopoly utility, so you just had one company and that was it, and one where there was a privately owned monopoly utility. Both of them would not let households put solar on their roof. So there have been a couple of benefits in the sense that, unfortunately, our politicians love coal, and if we had still had complete public ownership of our electricity assets, I don't think we'd have 1.6 million roofs, solar roofs, unfortunately. That said, so the market, I know it's controversial in a lefty, and I'm a really staunch lefty, but I think our politicians around the world are culpable. The fourth thing to say is that I do a lot of policy work, and currently I'm doing some work looking at how we can reintroduce public ownership into our energy system, because we do need it. We need to introduce publicly assets and organisations that operate in our energy system that are operating in the public good. Community energy groups are doing it, but they are small. They're small. We need bigger actors as well. So what you're seeing is Queensland has the Queensland government has committed to establish a new publicly owned entity that will build renewable energy projects. The New South Wales Labor Party has just agreed at their state conference 2 weekends ago to do something similar if they come to power. We have just seen that in South Australia, the South Australian government is now owning the largest battery in the world. So that will be a publicly owned asset. And we think that actually that's where we need public ownership to start off with, is in two spaces. One is in that firm supply that I was talking about earlier, because that's where power companies are screwing us most at the moment through their gas plants. And then the second area is we think that there needs to be the establishment of a new publicly owned public interest retailer, particularly for low-income households, because they're the ones getting most screwed at the moment. So those are the two big steps that I think we need towards public ownership, but I do want to say that it's not all sunshine and roses.
My name's Ken Cregan, and that was an important question and answer, that last one, and it's very serious what's happening with privatisation, not only in energy but in banks where financial people come in and take control. And Nicky, you are looking for disruption to have a new playing field. Photovoltaics generated DC, wind turbines, alternating current depending upon the rotational speed. Have you ever thought about changing the frequency? It doesn't have to be 50 cycles per second. You could go, for example, at 10 kilocycles per second, which would give you enough bandwidth shift to put your energy on the privatised poles and wires and run your own system. And that disruption would cost them probably 10 years to catch up with you. So the question is, have you ever thought of running your network at a different frequency?
No, I haven't, but I know people who have. I know a lot of people who are, particularly in regional towns, who are currently thinking about how to string wires over the back fence and share electricity with their neighbours. I'm not necessarily advocating for it because there's a whole lot of safety questions around it, but I certainly think that there are a lot of local solutions that can be done. I won't speak to the power engineering of it because I'm not a power engineer by background, but I'll trust your word on that.
Good evening, thank you. I'm Joffre, and I've fought for electric co-ops in the Philippines for 10 years. I know its strength, and I actually warded off corporate takeovers of electric co-ops because they attempted to pull the wool over the eyes of its owners, its rightful owners. And my question really has to do with the economic framework that neoliberal economics applies, and even sometimes the left implicitly accepts. Just to give you a brief story, an electric co-op in the Philippines was attempted to be taken over because they scared their owners into thinking they owe the government, for an example, $10 million in debt, which scares the hell out of ordinary Filipinos. But when I asked them for the assets, the electric co-op was actually $15 million in assets, which means it's $5 million in equity, which was what the electric corporation wanted to take over. And when I asked them, what's the value of the land in your balance sheet? And they said, okay, it's about 5 million. When was the last time it was assessed? 10 years ago, when there was a war. Okay, so it's not 5 million, it's probably 50. Yeah, that's conservative. So you're going to allow a corporation to take over that $45 million in appreciation of your land without your knowing it. And that's precisely what I mean by frameworks. The economic rents, which I mentioned, which many economists and economic textbooks have forgotten, is the battle that it's the prize, it's the crown jewels that corporations want to get. And that is more than enough to provide affordable electricity, affordable utilities, affordable mass transit, affordable public goods and services that we are now being deprived because corporations want to privatize what they claim are inefficient state enterprises and gain and pocket that value for themselves. And I know it's a rhetorical question, but isn't it about time we fight, and we fight tooth and nail, to stop the systematic theft that has been happening in society? Thank you.
I'd like to answer that first in terms of what Nicky said about the privatisation and that it's not all, doesn't all smell like roses, but also the comment that was made earlier that big companies are also getting into this space, and if we don't democratise what we're doing through community engagement, then yes, exactly, big corporations will do it for us and we may not like what the result is. And waiting on governments to do that, yeah, quite sceptical, so I'm going to do it myself. Which also brings me to what I talked about when I talked about membership and the skills that members bring. If you weren't there to ask that question, sir, that organisation would have run scared and gone through with that sale. And that's what we're finding is we need these skills, these corporate skills in the organisation to ask those questions, to look at what's happening and to make sure that these things don't happen. And we need to attract people that have these skills and have this knowledge. So we need to be a democratic community organisation, but you also need to be an organisation that attracts smart people from business as usual companies that know the ins and outs of it. And either find the people that know that but have our values, or convince the people that know, that have the skills, that our values are better off for everyone in the long run. So.
Yeah, and I'd put it this way, you know, the energy transition and responding the way we need to climate, God forbid we leave that just to the engineers. Yes, the engineers have a massive role to play, but, you know, or the accountants, but we need the smart policy people, we need the smart corporate people, we need the marketers, we need the people that can tell human stories. We need diversity, and that's what we're doing brings to the equation. Look, there wasn't really much of a question in your comment, but I will respond by saying I agree with everything you said, and I agree with everything the previous person said as well. Couldn't agree more.
Hello, my name is Richard. I'd like you to assume that you had a magic wand and you could change one law or rule or regulation to facilitate community energy. What would it be?
Can we do 3 separate ones?
Yes. One each.
One each, maybe.
Well, I'll say the one that I'm campaigning for at the moment, that we're campaigning for. I want to see. What we're campaigning for, it's just changed a little, is a decade-long people's power package, people's energy. Basically going, we're in the midst of a transition. We've got to transition really quickly in the next decade. We want to put people at the front and centre of that, and we need the money to be able to do it. So, you know, basically it's a $1 billion, decade-long energy transition package that supports every single Australian person in their work and in their households to be able to afford to do solar energy efficiency and other types of renewables.
So what's the law?
It's a funding law. Right. So it's like the People's Arena. ARENA's been the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. It's enacted through legislation, enacting a program that's not dissimilar to that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Go on our website. You'll see the policy.
I'll give a slightly smarty pants answer. Our energy system is fundamentally designed based on large centralised energy distant from where the consumers are and distributing that out. And so the one thing that I would change is to turn that system on its head. But specifically, there's one rule that was knocked back recently. And what that rule says is that if you're not using the full cost of the network, then you shouldn't have to pay the full cost of the network. So if I'm got excess solar and I want to sell it to my neighbour or my neighbour's neighbour or someone a kilometre down the road, why should I have to pay the cost of the network as if the energy had come 100 kilometres from Lake Macquarie? that rule change, I think, would drastically change the dynamics, not just for community energy, but for distributed clean energy generally. And it's a real shame that it didn't go through. That would be my one thing.
I'm not quite across all the legals. I'm purely in the administration of Pingala. But the way I understand at the moment, there is no allowance in regulation for cross-border, property border networks. And I'd like to see the opportunity to be able to set up a lot more local private networks in regulation.
To sell energy locally.
Yeah.
My question kind of covers exactly the same thing. It's that with that kind of peer-to-peer, selling your excess solar power to your neighbours, are there actual regulations that prohibit that at the moment? Like, not just the cost of having to pay the network fee, but are there regulations that prohibit that?
Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. Yeah, there's a bunch of regulations that prohibit it.
So the main thing is that to sell electricity, you need to have a retail license. You can get a retail license exemption, which some organisations like Pingala do, but if you want to do it more properly, you need to have a retail license, which means that you need to have about 5 million in working capital. So, like most of the regulations essentially come back down to cost, and make it prohibitive for small players to be able to do things, and small players being from individual households through to small community enterprises and organisations through to new startups. So it's really skewed in the incumbent's favour. Which is why, one of the actions that I think is really important is switching your retailer. If you are with one of the big 3 retailers, don't be. There are 3 retailers that work a lot with community energy groups. New one called Energy Locals, Enova, if you're outside of Sydney, which is the community-owned retailer, and also Power Shop, though they're probably more corporate, but just like the power of the big 3 gentailers and the power that they have over the rules of the game and how rules are made is enormous.
Yeah. From our perspective, because what we've been trying to do is to create an investment opportunity for local community members, we've found ourselves sitting at the junction of 2 heavily regulated industries. This is a financial services industry and the energy industry. And that just creates so many challenges for us. There's so many obstacles in our way, and we could have a half a day conversation about why what you asked is difficult to do. But the great thing is that we're not letting that stop us. We're getting along and we're hacking around the rules, and we're operating within the bounds of the law. But we're figuring out ways to make this happen that are going to deliver the outcomes we want. We're demonstrating that it's possible, and we're building the community support that will ultimately result in these rules being overturned in time.
My name is Maureen Sale. I'm just wondering, I was very inspired by your idealistic and really enthusiastic presentation. You said you started in 2013, yeah? Now, what I'm wondering, and you gave us a very good explanation about a brewery in Newtown, which got funding, etc., through crowdfunding. What I want to know is, what have you achieved elsewhere, and have you got branches going in other parts of Australia?
So at the moment, we have a pipeline of host sites that we're working towards. We can't talk about anything specific at the moment, but you'll need to sign up for our newsletter if you want to find out what's happening as it comes up. In terms of around Australia, we've focused ourselves as Sydney Renewables, which is part of our mantra at the moment. There's a lot of other community energy organisations around Australia, and we as part from we don't want to step on their toes, but they're doing great things, and we don't want to steal customers or anything like that. We don't want to be in competition with those organisations. In saying that, having our first project and having the co-op means that we already have a vehicle for smaller organisations that don't have the either size or faculty to create their own community projects. So we've been talking to some organisations, for example, a small group at Canada Bay, about maybe they do the project, they find the project, they're involved in the project, but then we act as the larger financial vehicle for that to happen. So it's in its infancy, but it's an opportunity for us to partner with people and try and get people locally to do that in their own groups and come to us when they need that high-level help.
There's I'm actually going to do a double proverb thing, right? How often do you ever see that? There's an African proverb which is that you can either go on your own and go quickly, or you can go a long distance if you take people with you. And it feels to me that we've been taking that second option. We're here for the long distance. We've taken a lot of people with us, and that carries with it a bunch of challenges. We're a volunteer-run organisation, and it has meant that we've operated relatively slowly. But I think we've got a really solid foundation. We set ourselves up, as Nigel says, to be the group for Sydney, and when you ask yourself, what is the community of Sydney, you immediately land on this answer that there is no such thing. There is actually a bunch of different communities within Sydney. And so we see our role as being an organisation that helps the communities within Sydney to make their own clean energy projects happen, to have a greater say, to have greater benefit sharing. And the Canada Bay example is a great example of that. The second one is that is an African proverb that some people think Gandhi said, which is, everything you do for me but without me, you do against me. And so what that means is that if we just go into an area and say, hey, community, this we know, we've got the model, we figured it out for you, we know what works for you, then we're probably making a pretty big mistake. Actually, we need to be genuinely empowering that community to decide what they want. And along the way, we can offer them the choice that they might be able to use our cooperative as a vehicle to make their lives easier. But if they don't want to, then they shouldn't be obliged to. So that's really where we're going into the future.
I think those guys are being modest. I think that from an outsider perspective, that there's a couple of things that they've done that we should talk about. One of them is, people here heard of the Sydney Alliance? Yeah, the Sydney Alliance. Yeah, the network of different community organisations, civil society organisations, building, organising capacity and power across Sydney. Pingala is one of the organisations that inspired their new energy project, which is working with culturally and linguistically diverse households and communities across Western Sydney. So Pingala people have been involved in providing advice around how to do that. In a really genuine way. They've also been working with a few Aboriginal communities in northwest New South Wales that has spurned now a new First Nations Renewable Energy Alliance. And they're one of the leaders in what is actually a movement. This talk was a talk about the community energy movement. It is a movement. It's a movement of more than 100 organisations. And they are in every state and territory around the country. They are urban, they are rural, they are made up of lots of different types of people. And they've started slowly. Our doing these community energy projects are hard, so some of them don't have projects yet. Some of them only got one project, but this week we've actually seen one of the biggest weeks in community energy in Australia's history because 4 projects were announced this week. Clear Sky Solar in northern Sydney, Repower Shoalhaven down in Nowra, and then Carina that works nationally has got a new project in Brisbane and in Victoria. So for the first time ever, we've seen 4 new community energy projects in 1 week. So this is a movement that has gone inch by inch, but is making real gains and is really exciting. So I think you said we were idealistic and inspiring. We are idealistic and inspiring, and we are also making change in the world, and we are not alone in doing it.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much for a very exciting talk. That was so inspiring. I'm really glad I invited you to come, and actually managed to get you to come because it took a while. It took a while to convince you to come. So next week we've got a slightly more bleak topic. Killer robots and a new arms race. How is Australia involved? With Professor Toby Walsh and Dr. Sue Wareham. So it'd be wonderful if you all came back next week, and thanks for coming tonight. And once again, can you give a round of applause to our fantastic speakers tonight?